secondary sector. These days, nowadays, the secondary sector is really controlled by China, Brazil, and India. So countries like America, like Germany, like Italy, like France, they are losing their competitiveness in the secondary sector to these developed, newly industrialized countries, because there's industrialization, which means industrialization means the process of becoming industrialized. That means a non-industrialized economy becoming industrialized. That is what industrialization means. That means a country its strength is in the primary sector, is now having strength in the secondary sector, because the secondary sector is about industrialization, manufacturing. So if these countries if these economies are being industrialized, it means now they are producing goods. So their strength is now in the manufacturing sector. So these countries that I just mentioned, like China, like Brazil, like India, they have more strength in the secondary sector than other sectors these days. So when you see countries like America, like Germany, and other European countries, they start thinking about services. So they switch into services. So they lost the control. They lost the market of industrialization. They lost the manufacturing market to these countries that are now industrialized. Do you get the point?
Yes.
So you see, they switch because they lost it. They move on to tertiary sector, and because countries like China, Brazil, and India, they won the battle, they stay in the secondary sector. So these are, you get the point here.
Yes.
So reasons for moving from one sector to another this is the second reason. You lose your competitiveness in one sector, then you have to move to other to find your strength in other sector. Do you get the second point there?
Yes.
The third point, wealth seems to be increasing as a result. People spend more on the services, which increase the production scale of service sector than primary and secondary sector. These days, income is increasing. Wealth is increasing, no matter how you look at it. Yeah, there are still poor people, but wealth is increasing day by day. So this means that people start thinking about services. People think about traveling. People think about education. People think about insurance policies. So because they now have more income, so they think about those services. You understand? Mm-hmm. And because of that reason, that mindset, their thinking start changing from being involved, consuming the primary and secondary sector to the service sector. So people spend now more on the service sector than the primary and secondary sector. As a result of that, businesses start switching to becoming service sector.
Mm-hmm.
Do you get the point here?
Yes.
So that's the point about that. So the reasons why there are changes in the sectors are one. Okay. Reasons why there are changes in the economic sector are one, resources might be depleted.
Mm-hmm.
Two, wealth is increasing. And three, we talked about most developed economies, they might have lost their competitiveness to newly industrialized countries. So these are the reasons why there are changes in the economic activity. I think it's clear.
Yes.
Then we'll go to mixed economy. So when we talk about mixed economy, it's the combination of the market system and the planned system. So when we talk about the market system, we're talking about the private sector. And we're talking about the planned system, we're talking about the public sector. So here, we combine both primary and secondary, both private and public sector together to give us a mixed economy. Why do we have to talk about mixed economy? We have to talk about mixed economy because either ways, resources cannot fully be utilized. The private sector cannot give us all what we want. The public sector cannot give us all what we want. The private sector would not produce public goods.
Yes.
The public sector will only produce goods that they feel it's important for the welfare. So we won't be able to get luxury from the public sector. And we won't be able to get public goods from the private sector. So that means if we want both goods, we need to combine both sectors. So that's why most of the countries are in the mixed economy. Do you get the point here?
Yes.
So what's the private sector? The private sector is a business that are involved in individual businesses, firms that are in charge. They take charge. They control it. So decisions making, resources allocation, price giving are through individuals and private firms. That is why we call them the private sector. And for the public sector, this involves businesses that are owned and controlled by the government or the state. That is the secondary sector. I think it's clear.
Yes.
So, mixed economy and recent changes. Why do we have recent changes in the mixed economy? Governments have started changing. Government of each country starts changing from being a planned economy to mixed economy. Why? Number one, private sectors are expected to be more efficient than public sector. So there's privatization these days. Why are governments parastatals being given out to private individuals or private firms? Because private firms are more efficient, are expected to be more efficient than the public sector. So the first reason why there are changes in the public sector to the private sector is that they lack efficiency in the public sector. And in the private sector, you can see in the private sector, there's efficiency. Why is there efficiency in the private sector? Because there's motivation to make profit. Unlike the public sector, they don't want to make profit. They just want to service the people.
Employment will increase. That's one aim for the government. So
Yeah, government would increase employment,
yes.
irrespective of whatever the cost might be. But the private sector would not. They only employ workers based on what they can offer. Do you get it? So the first point is that efficiency comes through the private sector. The second one I wrote, private sector owners have the ability to invest more capital than government, which main source of revenue is taxation. So the public sector, the private sector, because they are profit oriented, they are entrepreneurs. They want to make more profit. So they can take the risk of injecting more cash, more capital into the business. Public sector will not do so because public funds are through taxation, and they have policies, there are laws that binds or that are in place for each spending. The private sector would not need to go through laws, through constitution before they spend. It's their money. So the private sector has the ability to spend more because they can invest more, unlike the public sector. That's the second reason. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. And the third reason is that privatization will bring about competitiveness. If it's in the public sector, there won't be competition. But for the fact that the public sector, which has a monopoly, has privatized, it means new businesses can come into that industry. For example, we're talking about the General Electric Company of Libya, GECO. It's controlled by the Libyan government. If it is being privatized, if it's being sold to private individuals, what does that mean? It means that other companies that wants to come into that industry will be able to come into the industry. But they can't now because it is controlled by the government. So it is monopolized. So that's why we won't see the private sector in electricity. You won't see the private sector in power. That we call it power. They won't be in power sector because the power sector is monopolized. It's controlled by the Libyan government. But as soon as the Libyan government privatized General Electric Company of Libya, then more electrical companies will come into the power industry. Do you get it? As a result of that, there will be competitiveness. So privatization brings about what? Competitiveness. So these are the reasons why government would want to encourage privatization. Because as soon as privatization is encouraged, output of that country would increase. Efficiency in that country will increase. But the problem about privatization is that they employ less people. Unlike the public sector. The public sector will employ. That's why when you check the Libyan population or the working population in Libya, or you check the public sector in Libya, they have highest proportion of the percent or highest population in the public sector working than in the private sector.
Yes.
Government of the country would employ more workers because it is one of the macroeconomic objective to reduce unemployment. Do you understand? So, but the private sector, it will bring about efficiency. It will bring about increase in output. It will bring about more choices for consumers. But the problem is that they employ less workers. So there's possibility we find out that with privatization we have increase in unemployment rate. Is it clear?
Yes.
So that's all about chapter 2.